Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Friday Ramblings. We continue to get spooky with some more Halloween hijinks. Those of you who went ahead and read the title instead of excitingly clicking on the video right away, no, but let's get this officially said. We're going to discuss the Poltergeist movie series. Now note, I did say the movie series. We are specifically going to save the Poltergeist the Legacy TV show for the future because it can take up its own entry. There's a lot of content there, and it deserves a little bit of salute on its own instead of just a footnote as part of another video. So with that said, let's break down your Poltergeist movies. The original Poltergeist came out in 1982, was directed by Tobe Hooper, or Tobe Hooper, who is one of the great hallmarks of the horror genre, being most famous for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The movie was written by Steven Spielberg, Michael Grayus, and Mark Victor. I know you're thinking, well, hey, Spielberg's an iconic director. Why didn't he just direct the movie himself? Since he had this idea for a great ghost story movie. And that's because of legalities. See, at the time that Steven Spielberg had the idea, he was working on E.T. E.T. and Poltergeist would actually be released one right after the other. But because of his contract for his work on E.T., which he had already signed, as he had, while coming up with this idea for a ghost story, begun prep work on E.T., he was not allowed to direct any other film, as the studio wanted Spielberg to give this movie his full focus. And I keep going plural because I'm thinking of the other two writers, and by all means, we do not want to overlook what Victor and Grace brought to the film as well as writers. Spielberg sought them out, specifically wanting to work with them on a few ideas, but all three of them agreed the ghost story was the most interesting one. The movie stars Jo Beth Williams, Craig T. Nelson, Beecher Strait, Dominic Dunn, Heather O'Rourke, as well as a few others. Oh, also, got to mention her because she'll come up again. Zelda Rubinstein as the psychic Pangea. Of course, Craig T. Nelson and Jo Beth Williams, being the older actors here, played the parents in the movie, with Dominic Dunn portraying the older daughter, Dana, Heather O'Rourke as younger daughter Carol Ann, and also Oliver Robbins as son Robbie. Beecher Strait being Dr. Lesh, the original researcher brought in to try and figure out what is going on in the house along with her team. So let's get a plot breakdown now that we have done the nitty-gritty. Steve and Diane Freeland live in a California planned community where Steve is a successful real estate developer and Diane is a home wife. However, soon after moving into their new home, Carol Ann begins talking to the television, claiming that she is communicating with somebody. Initially dismissed as a case of, imaginary friend. The Freeling parents do not freak out quite yet. However, after a few other odd, seemingly physics-defying symptoms begin manifesting, things take a turn for the worst, and the activities start becoming more and more intense, including such classics as psychokinesis and glasses of drinks spontaneously breaking. Eventually, during a severe thunderstorm, the gnarled backyard tree apparently comes to life with a large limb crashing through the youngest children's bedroom windows, grabbing the son Robbie and apparently attempting to devour him. While the family rushes outside to rescue Robbie, Carol Ann is sucked into a portal inside the closet, only for her to start speaking directly through the TV. During this time, Dr. Lesh, the aforementioned Beatrice Straight, and her 2 team members begin investigating as parapsychologists, determining a poltergeist intrusion involving multiple ghosts. It is at this time that Steve, trying to figure out why this is going on, learns from his boss, Mr. Teague, that the development they live in was built on a former cemetery. The graves were moved to a nearby location, but the bodies were not. Yeah, nothing like disrespecting the dead to disturb the dead. The phenomenon would continue to grow, including in one of the most iconic scenes in the movie, in which Robbie's clown doll, once again, like the tree, comes to life and attacks him. The scene would be parodied many years later in the Scary Movie franchise, which was a satire of various horror movies, as well as being a key point of the remake, which we will discuss in a minute, to the point that the clown doll itself was used in the marketing material. Eventually, they discover the nature of the portal in the upper part of the house, and Dr. Lesh calls in the spiritual medium Tangina Barons. Tangina determines the spirits are lingering and are not at rest, being attracted to Carol Ann's life force. She also detects that there is, besides the more benign spirits that are generally credited with the early harmless phenomenon, the more aggressive phenomenon being the result of a much more malevolent spirit known as the Beast, who is partially to blame for the spirits not crossing over. This all leads to an incredible climax with what for the time was quite nice special effects, including a lot of practical effects, because CGI really wasn't something done back then. And let's be honest, personally, especially in horror, I always like practical effects. That's just me, though. Wherein things come to a drastic head. Carol Ann is rescued from the alternate dimension after hearing the iconic line of, "Go into the light, Carol Ann," which itself has been parodied and satired many, many times over. And much more aggression from the Beast and the spirits under his control, including the various corpses and coffins rising to the surface due to the intense thunderstorm, turning the entire backyard into a giant mud pit. Tangina herself declares the house is, quote, clean. However, as they are getting ready to pack and leave the house, the Beast ambushes Diane and the children, aiming for a second kidnapping attempt. Ultimately, Steve, who had been away dealing with his boss again, and Tangina return, and everybody manages to just barely make it into the car before the house implodes into the portal. Family checks into a room at the Holiday Inn, with the last thing seen before the credits being Papa Steve shoving the mini TV out of the hotel room, having had enough television, throwing back to the fact the phenomenon all started with talking to the TV. In and of itself, it sounds like a standard horror movie. But this is where Poltergeist steps up the game, because most of the brilliance of this is due to the cast. Jo Beth Williams and Craig T. Nelson make excellent parents who showed great concern for their children, as well as highlighting the drama of having a child literally disappear within their own home, and as such being forced to accept that their home is not a safe place, as opposed to a safe space, which is a different concept we don't care for here. Ooh, there is nothing safe at Halloween. As well as the supporting cast doing an excellent job. Zelda Rubinstein herself making the character of Tangina iconic throughout the horror genre. This all leads to sequels, because, hey, when you get a movie that pretty much everybody who sees it loves, you gotta make a sequel. Not to mention, the movie made profit. What kind of profit? Well, it had a budget of $10.7 million, and it made $121.7 million at the box office. So, making over 10 times the budget in profit? Yeah, that's getting a sequel. The studio got its money, and audiences like the movie. That's how sequels are made. Yep, you can't keep evil down. And Poltergeist 2: The Other Side came to us in 1986. Serving as a direct sequel to the original Poltergeist movie, it follows the Freeling family, who again find themselves under attack from supernatural forces led by the Beast, who in this film is revealed to be the spirit of an insane preacher who led an apocalyptic cult during the 19th century. Besides Tangina, they are now joined by a Native American shaman. Now, this movie still delivers, although the suspense isn't quite as much there, because we already know what we're dealing with this being a sequel. We know about the Beast, we know it wants Carol Ann, but the good news is this time they do increase the suspense and creep quotient by giving the Beast not just a full origin, where it is blatantly made apparent this is the evil of man and not some hellspawn demon, but given a physical form, as early in the film, the preacher Cain, played by Julian Beck, shows up trying to lure Carol Ann away from the protection of her family, including her grandma Jess, this being Mother Diane's mother, so her maternal grandmother, which would have probably been the less awkward way to phrase that. Grandma Jess is highly clairvoyant and believes that Diane and Carol Ann possess the same abilities, explaining why Carol Ann was sought by the Beast to begin with. Her clairvoyant abilities and innocent and pure heart, due to her young age, make her an ideal candidate for manipulation by evil spirits such as Preacher Cain. Tangina brings around, as we said before, her friend, Native American shaman Taylor, played by Will Sampson, who, yes, for all you folks who want to get into doing things the right way, the social justice way, for reference, Will Sampson is, in fact, a member of the Muskogee tribe. also occasionally referred to as Muskogee Creek and Muskogee Creek Confederacy. Thus, yes, the Native American shaman was played by a Native American actor. So nobody should be upset about casting in the movie. We good? Good. We're here for scary fun, not complaining. For reference, William Sampson Jr. also appeared as Chief Bromden, the deaf and mute character in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Crazy Horse in the 1977 Western The White Buffalo, and as 10 Bears in 1976's The Outlaw Josie Wales. So he is another great veteran actor who helps make sure that a lot of acting talent goes into making this not just another horror movie. It's amazing what happens when studios believe in your film and give you a good budget. You can hire good actors to help carry the plot. And let's be honest, the plot isn't, as I said, quite as suspenseful and focused on building up that slow sense of dread as the first movie. This is a major sequel syndrome issue. Not going to blame it. However, the special effects go into high gear. One of the most iconic sequences being after Papa Steve, in an effort to deal with his conflicting lack of beliefs in the spiritual world and the obvious evidence of what is happening around him for the second time, decides to get drunk on tequila, which includes an authentic mezcal worm. For those of you who don't know, a mezcal worm is an insect larva found in various types of mezcal produced in Mexico and is often considered part of authentic tequila drinking. Unfortunately, the beast Reverend Cain here decides to possess the mezcal worm, which in turn allows him to temporarily possess Steve before he upchucks the worm, which is now much larger and very ugly and demonic looking. Excellent special effects puppetry build. Love it. When all is said and done, the Freelings have to return to the site of the original house, and along with Tangina enter the cavern below their former home where the aforementioned Cain and his apocalyptic cult did their wicked, sinful things before their eventual mortal demise. There, Cain pulls Diane and Carol Ann over into the other side, where he attempts the final battle. Steve and Robbie jump in after them through a fire started by Medicine Man Taylor, where the family unite and manage to defeat the beast through the power of their love and a Medicine Man enhanced spear given to Papa Steve, who stabs Cain with it, weakening the spirit enough to end his threat. Carol Ann, though, weakened from the attempts to have her life force drained by Cain, thinks about going to the afterlife, but is encouraged to continue to live by her grandma Jess, who appears as a guardian spirit to her family, like all grandmas, because grandmas are awesome. Freelings managed to return safely, thanking Taylor and Tangina for giving the family car to Taylor, who had previously expressed an affection for it, before realizing that is their only ride home, giving the end credits a bit of a chuckle as Steve starts chasing after the departing Taylor and Tangina, needing a ride. So how did this movie do? Well, with a budget of $19 million, it made $75 million at the box office. Which means, yes, the movie did still make a respectable profit. Not quite as much as the previous film, but these things happen. It was still a successful film. And despite not exactly wowing the critics left and right, they did generally praise the special effects, and as we can tell from the box office report, fans loved it. Now, it should be noted that during this movie, Dominic Dunne did not appear. This is because, unfortunately, make sure I'm actually... Dominic Dunne herself had died shortly after the release of the first movie. This is often cited, along with Heather O'Rourke's death just before the release of the third movie, as proof of a poltergeist curse, usually tied into the fact that the skeletons in the first movie were real skeletons, this being done as a budget call because at the time use of real skeletons was not unheard of in Hollywood movies, as they were cheaper than creating authentic looking artificial skeletons, along with the general content of the movie. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say, because I knew we were going to have to discuss the Poltergeist Curse at one point, let's go ahead and get it done while discussing Dominic Dunne's disappearance from Poltergeist 2, with little note being made of it in the script, out of respect for the departed actress, along with them not recasting, because, again, respecting her passing and what she brought to the first movie. I personally don't believe in the Poltergeist curse. Dominic Dunne was killed by a very toxic, abusive ex-boyfriend. There was, a record of previous domestic assault by him before he fatally choked her out after their breakup, when he insisted that they get back together. It is a tragic thing, but it's not something we need to blame supernatural on, much like the movie pointing out that the beast was the malevolent spirit of a wicked man. Dominic Dunne was killed by a horrible person. We do not need to blame supernatural forces for bad people doing bad things. Heather O'Rourke's death was, at the time, not 100% confirmed, but has since, over the years, generally been attributed to a parasitic infection gotten from drinking improperly filtered well water at her family home, and subsequent misdiagnosis of her symptoms as being a result of Crohn's disease. Thus, the medicine she was given, specifically cortisol injections, abated the symptoms but did not actually treat the infection itself, allowing it to worsen during filming of Poltergeist 3, to the point that when things got so bad during the period of editing and last-minute reshoots, it was simply too late, no matter what kind of emergency surgery they did on her. Again, this is a sad, tragic thing, but we do not need to blame supernatural occurrences for, what was human error on behalf of the doctor. Them both occurring during the period, where, as I said, Dominic Dunne dying shortly after the first movie came out and Heather O'Rourke dying excuse me. Good thing is, I promise that's not a demonic worm trying to crawl out of me, like poor Papa Steve had in the second movie. But yes, Heather O'Rourke dying during the period between principal filming and release of the third movie. Yes, they are eerie coincidences and they are tragic. Yes, there were occasional accidents on set of the first movie, but it is almost unheard of for movies to have accidents during filming of them. These do not necessitate curses. I'm not saying curses don't exist, but in this case, it's not, it's not something that can't be explained. So, now that we've gotten the Poltergeist curse out of the way, let's discuss the third film and get along with this. Poltergeist 3 came out in 1988, and due to JoBeth Williams and Craig T. Nelson opting out of appearing in the film, Heather O'Rourke now acted alongside Tom Skerritt, Nancy Allen, and Laura Flynn Boyle. Although Zelda Rubinstein did return as well as Tangina, meaning that these two characters are the only ones to appear in all three movies. Partial credit for the character of Kane because he is unseen and unnamed in the first movie, only being referred to as the Beast. So, again, he gets partial credit on the first one. Tom Skerritt plays Heather O'Rourke's character of Carol Ann. Blah, blah, blah. Uncle Bruce, along with Nancy Allen as his wife, and Laura Flynn Boyle as Donna Gardner, who is the daughter and thus Carol Ann's cousin. The basic plot is that the Freeling family has sent Carol Ann from California to live with her family in Chicago. Being told she is living there temporarily to attend a unique school for gifted children with emotional problems. One of the plot points of the film is that Aunt Pat is Diane's sister, and at various points in the film shows an inability to emotionally connect with Carol Ann, theorizing to her husband that in fact she thinks that Carol Ann was sent to them because her sister and Papa Steve simply wanted Carol Ann out of the house as they cannot deal with her, much like Steve in the first movie, both adults not believing in the supernatural and thus thinking that all of this was Carol Ann acting out and, childish fibs and whatnot, getting out of control. The typical thing doubtful parents have in any given decade done to explain away stuff they don't want to admit might have happened. Ultimately, Donna, who is, let me make sure I get this right, because I'm trying to glance up and down in my notes here. Donna is actually Carol Ann's step cousin, as she is Bruce's daughter from a previous marriage. Bruce and Pat haven't only more recently married. Ultimately, Carol Ann is made to discuss her experiences by the private school's in-house psychiatrist, Dr. Seaton, who is played by Richard Fire, should be noted. believing Carol Ann to be delusional and in denial about the events that actually occurred, forces her to intimately discuss the experiences, giving the evil Reverend Cain a way back, as the constant discussion, including bits of hypnosis being used as part of the therapy, essentially giving his spirit an anchor point. This being an old superstition in various cultures that if you speak about the dead too often, you essentially call them back. Reverend Cain then begins appearing in mirrors as a way of spying on and manipulating people. Again, superstition stating from various old cultures that mirrors were gateways to other realms, or potentially could be used as such in magical rituals. And the still skeptic Dr. Seaton believing that Carol Ann has used herself a form of mass hypnosis to convince her family of the supernatural things having occurred, and that she has an inherently manipulative personality. Tangina, sensing the return of Cain, travels cross country to protect Carol Ann. The family lives in a high-rise in Chicago specifically, and Cain begins taking control of the building, first and foremost draining it of the heat, creating an environment that is uncomfortable for the living mortals. Cain uses his power to turn the reflections in the various mirrors around the high-rise building into evil doppelgangers who proceed to kidnap and swap places with different characters. Fortunately, Tangina arrives just in time and begins protecting Carol Ann, including telling her that the mirrors are the key to Cain's power. Horrible things beginning to continue to occur, including the death of Dr. Seaton, which is what he gets for being a bad skeptic man, leading up to a final battle where Tangina is killed by Cain, who had disguised himself as Carol Ann. However, in death, Tangina is able to still practice her abilities and attack Cain in his own realm of existence. When push comes to shove, though, once again, family love is the key to saving the day. And Pat being encouraged to admit the true familial love she has for her niece Carol Ann, despite her various aggressive ways of dealing with Carol Ann and her claims that all of this was really happening. When it's all said and done, upon losing control of Carol Ann due to the emotional support of her aunt, Reverend Cain is convinced by the now deceased Tangina to join her in the light, fully crossing over to the other side and ending his threat for good. In the end, lightning flashes over the building, and we do hear evil laughter from Cain, implying that he may not be 100% gone, or that a small remnant of his evil may remain in the building. Of course, no sequel would develop from this plot point, as the movie, having a $9.5 million budget and only a box office of $14.1 million, was pushing on the verge of, well, not making a profit, and there was no official Poltergeist 4 developed. It should be noted that the last bit of filming being done after the principal filming period and at the point where Heather's health turned one last time for the worst, caused them to reshoot the original planned ending using a stand-in for O'Rourke. The movie was not well liked by critics, as well as being, as I said, financially disappointing. However, director Gary Sherman has said that although he's proud of portions of the movie, particularly creative use of mechanical in-camera effects instead of the traditional optic effects seen in movies of the horror genre, it is the least favorite of the films he has made. Personally, I enjoy the movie. I think the twist of having the mirrors and at one point a swimming pool being used as channels as well as the evil doppelgangers gave the actors some fun things to work with and showed that in his final attempts to claim Carol Ann's life, Reverend Cain had hit even further depths of aggression and violence towards the living realm. Also giving Tangina a nice little send-off as, along with Heather O'Rourke's character of Carol Ann, the only character to appear in all three, and thus being an anchor of the film's plot points throughout the three movies. Ultimately, as we said, there would be no Poltergeist 4. However, during the 1990s, a script for potential prequel was being written, focusing on the events of Reverend Cain before his passing. This would have been done more as a psychological horror movie. However, the deal fell through, and while several of the Poltergeist 4 plans have come into line over the years, none of them were ever fully developed and greenlit. Still, when it's all said and done, we did have, in 2015, a remake. As we know, I'm personally not a big fan of remakes here, especially horror remakes and reboots, because most horror genres, once you get past a couple movies, really have pretty loose continuity, and it's like, dude, if you want to bring an enemy back from the dead, you can do it. Most of them aren't really normal mortals anyway, so who cares? Still, let's go ahead and get through this for the sake of completionist. 2015 reboot of Poltergeist was produced by Sam Raimi and Rob Tapert's Ghost House Pictures and Roy Lee's Vertigo Entertainment, starring Sam Rockwell, Rosemary DeWitt, Jared Harris, and Jane Addams. It was released by 20th Century Fox and MGM. Received mixed reviews from critics for excessive jump scares, and had what is considered moderate box office success with a gross of $95 million over a budget of $35 million. Now note, while ratio-wise this is a pretty, big stretch, in modern times, especially for something that was being done as a attempts to reinvigorate a iconic franchise, it was not considered successful enough to continue with sequels. I don't know, it's this weird thing in Hollywood where, you would think any movie that made a profit and had a fan base you'd want to follow up on, but they have this completely different Hollywood math. I don't understand it. If I made like a $50-60 million profit, I would consider that a success, period. But, studio heads have these weird standards. Ultimately, it is a remake of and reboot of the plot only of the first movie, and as I said, highly markets itself around the infamous possessed clown doll scene, the clown doll appearing on the movie poster. The family name has been changed from the Freelings to the Bowens. However, the basic plot is by and large the same with an updating of time, so it's a current film, much like the original was, and thus you get a little more use of technology. One of the kids has a toy drone, which features in part of the plot, because floating cameras. It's already a film. We already have plenty of cameras behind the scenes. I don't need more cameras. I don't know, I just don't like drones. The toy drone being used partly to draw out daughter Maddie from the infamous other side. But, as I said, the movie was considered financially disappointing. Critics really weren't big on it, so things happened. For those of you who want some more official data, Rotten Tomatoes film has a rating of 29% based on 137 reviews and an average rating of 4.81 out of 10. Metacritic gives the film a score of 47 out of 100 based on 27 critics. And when it's all said and done, it is generally considered to be, unfortunately, a very middle-of-the-road horror movie. Personally, I think part of it is it suffered from occurring at a point in time where a lot of horror movies were being released, especially ones that were reboots/remakes, depending on which term you prefer. Again, I'm not 100% sure on what the difference between the two terms is when it's all said and done. But it was a time where these kind of movies were flooding the market, and what good the movie did do got overlooked by the cliches it did rely on and the iconic legacy of the movie it was redoing. Still, there are rumors that Hollywood is going to attempt once again to reboot the franchise. The Russo brothers have been attached to one script. But whether it happens, we'll see. Still, in closing, I do recommend the original trilogy if you have never seen them. The first movie is one of the all-time great horror movies, at least here in America. I'm not going to get into European horror. I'm not super familiar with it. So I will clarify when I say one of the all-time great horror movies, I'm speaking about American-made and released here in America ones because that's what I'm familiar with. I mean, no disrespect to European horror, but I can't rank it because I'm not well versed in it. Still, the sequels are fair sequels in and of themselves and do serve plot-wise as good continuations of the Carol Ann Kane story. I would not mind some sort of maybe next generation, admitting the passage of time kind of sequel to Poltergeist. Possibly something to tie the film and the barely related, if at all, TV series, which, as I said, we will discuss in another video another time, a little more closely and blatantly. But you have a short franchise. If you can find them online or find a DVD copy like on my cell phone, go ahead and binge it in October here. We encourage you. There's still time. I think you'll enjoy the movies a lot. And if you do this and you don't like it, give me a comment. If you do and you love them, give me a comment. Heck, just plain comment because you watched the video. I always do enjoy interacting with my viewers, and that's why I hope you join us next week, because we got a couple more horror movies, or not so much movies, but horror topics to discuss before October is all said and done. We're here every Friday. That's why they're the Friday Ramblings. And remember, stay spooky.